Hi there and welcome back. So today we are going to be talking about simplifying radicals. So for your first warm-up question, and we can do this together or you can attempt it on your own, is that I just want you to evaluate and just think about what is 2 squared? So if I square 2, and if you really need to put that in the calculator, you can, but 2 squared is 4. And now if I have negative 2 squared, this squared here means that there are 2 copies. So there are 2 copies of this negative 2. So I'm just going to multiply out negative 2 times negative 2, and again, that's positive 4. So again, just something I want you guys to be keeping in mind. Alrighty, so I talked about in our previous lesson that we need to know our perfect squares. So I will do these with you, but if you can try to fill these out on your own, that would be awesome, because you do need to know these. You need to know what these things are. So the square root of 4, that's a perfect square, that's 2. The square root of 9, again, perfect square, that's 3. The square root of 144 is 12, and then the square root of 100 is 10. But now, the question to ask ourselves is, what do we do when the number under the square root symbol is not a perfect square? For example, you have like radical 8. Okay, so just to give you some vocabulary, the radical is taking the root of the number. The radicand is the value under the radical sign. And then the index or power is the number of the root that is taken. So here, I'll write this out for you. Let's do this. So this is your root. And then here is your radical. So that would be your radical. And then the radicand is just the number that's underneath the radical. Okay, so some of our steps for simplifying radicals. We're going to find the largest perfect square and then divide it evenly into the radicand. We're going to write out both factors under the radical signs and take the square root of the perfect square. And we're going to write our answer as the product of a coefficient and a radicand. Now, if you notice, I believe on your packet, there were plus or minuses here. I got rid of those. Actually, I believe I even wrote over it. Yep. I got rid of those because that actually is not exactly correct. I want you to just leave it as just the positive value. So the square root of 4 is 2, square root of 9 is 3. So if you want to, just cross out those plus or minuses. We're not going to get to that at this moment right now. Okay, so if I look at the first problem, I have the square root of 12. Well, I want to break up the square root of 12 and find what is a perfect square that goes into the square root of 12. Well, let's think. 12, we have 1 times 12. We have 2 times 6, 3 times 4, and again, we can just keep going, 4 times 3. We have 6 times 2, and then 12 times 1, if I'm just writing out every possibility. Now, only one of those sets of numbers makes up a perfect square. 2 is not a perfect square, and neither is 6, so that means these options are out. 12 is not a perfect square, that's why we're doing this, so 12 and 1 are out. So now, it doesn't matter whether I pick 3 or 4, 3, 4, or 4, 3, but in the end, and you guys are going to see as we go through these, it actually is helpful to pick the number on the left that's the perfect square. So if you notice, see how here 3 is not a perfect square? We're actually going to go with this option because on the left-hand side is the perfect square. So I'm going to write it in that order. I have the square root of 4 and the square root of 3. Now, if I look up here at my chart, I knew the square root of 4 is 2. So this is going to simplify to 2 radical 3. Okay, let's just keep going, and I'm going to highlight over the ones that we're going to do together and then the ones you're going to do on your own. Okay, so let's take a look at the square root of 50. Again, I want to break it up into two one of them being a perfect square, but we have those 2 radicals, because again, square root of 50 is not a perfect square. So I want to think of the numbers that multiply to 50. Well, we know we have 5 and 10. We have 2 and 25. We have 1 and 50. Okay, and we can keep going, but I'm just going to look at these numbers here. Now, 5 is not a perfect square, and neither is 10. 1 is not a perfect square, and neither is 50. 2 is not a perfect square, but 25 is. So remember what I said. You want to put the perfect square on the left, and then the non-perfect square on the right. Okay, so when you break up your radical of whatever that number is, I want you to put the perfect square on the left and then the non-perfect square on the right. Okay, but I'm just going to erase this here just so I can fill in what we have here. So the 25 is going to go under the radical here, and the 2 is going to go under the radical here. Now, again, I followed the order. Here is my perfect square. Here is my non-perfect square, meaning that's going to continue to stay under the radical. Well, again, if I look at my chart, the square root of 25 is 5. So this is just going to be 5 radical 2. Why don't you guys try question 3 on your own, and I will post the solution, the actual answer for what it is. I'm not going to show the work though, but try question 3 on your own. All right, so in the end, you should get to radical 7. Again, I'm not going to post the solution. You have to do that work on your own, but that's the final answer. Okay, let's keep moving on. Let's flip over to the next page. Now again, on your packet, you see how there are these square roots. The square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. We need to get rid of that plus or minus. Okay, so I'm actually just going to get rid of that on all of these. If you want to take a second and just cross that out on yours. Sorry about that. Okay, so I just got rid of it in front of all of those numbers. We're just taking the positive value of the square root currently. So let's just get started with the first one. I'll walk you through the first one, and then I'll pick and choose the ones that you're going to work on your own. All right, so for question 4, again, I want to think about the numbers that are going to multiply to 45. So let's see, I'm going to make a chart here. So numbers that multiply to 45, we know we have 9 and 5. We have 45 and 1. We have 15 and 3. And those are the sets of numbers that we're dealing with that multiply to 45. Again, we shouldn't even be considering 45 and 1 because there's a reason we're breaking this up into 2 radicals, because it's not a perfect square. So now I have to think, is 3 a perfect square? Is 15 a perfect square? Well, I don't see the square root of 3 or the square root of 15 on my chart, so that's out. Let's see. Now, between 9 and 5, which is the perfect square? Well, we know that the square root of 5 is not a perfect square, but the square root of 9 is. So the square root of 9 is going to go on the left, and the square root of 5 is going to go on the right. Remember, keep the perfect square on the left, and then the non-perfect square on the right. Okay, and now, just looking at my chart, what's the square root of 9? Well, the square root of 9 is 3, so this is just going to be 3 radical 5. That's my final answer. All right, so you guys can try 5 on your own. For question 6, again, I want to think about numbers that make up the number 24. So again, we're going to have the perfect square on the left. The non-perfect square gets put on the right. That order is going to be important for us, guys. It just helps keeps us organized. So numbers that are multiplying 24. Well, I know I have 1 and 24. I have 3 and 8, I have 2, I have 12, and I have 4 and 6. Now, again, we know that that's not even an option. That's why we're breaking up this square root into 2. 3 and 8, neither of these is a perfect square. 2 and 12, again, neither of these is a perfect square. But 4 and 6, which one's the perfect square? Is it the 4 or is it the 6? 4 is our perfect square. I can take the square root of 4. So we're going to write square root of 4, square root of 6, and I know the square root of 4 is 2, so this becomes 2 radical 6. Okay, hopefully we're starting to get the hang of this. You're going to do question 7 on your own, and I'm going to do question 8 with you right now. Alrighty, so now I have this number out front, and you're like, oof, that's kind of gross. Well, we're going to just leave it, and I'm just going to worry about the square root of 16. Now, square root of 16. Notice anything about that number? Yeah, it's on our chart. Square root of 16 is 4. I don't need to break it up into a table like I did here or here. It's not necessary because the square root of 16 is just 4. So this is saying, okay, there's the 3 on the outside, and then the square root of 16 is 4. Now the operation between these two numbers here is multiplication. Really, these are being multiplied. So I'm going to put parentheses. The operation between the number in the front of the radical to then the actual radical number, they're being multiplied. So my answer here is just 12. All right, and I'll write down the solutions for you for 5 and 7, but you need to show the work. So for 5, your answer here is 10 rad 2. And then for question 7, your answer here is 2 radical 10. Okay. All right, let's just keep going. All right, hopefully, again, we're getting the hang of this. Now, I am going to tell you how you can use your calculator to actually do these. Just for lack of space, since I can't actually display this, if you were to go into your calculator and hit the y equals button on the top left. So the y equals button on the top left. There's a button there. I want you guys to type into y1. You're going to type in the number under the radical. So for this example, question 10, we're going to do this one together. I want you to type in y1 equals, you're going to write 75, take the number under the radical, do not write square root. Okay, I don't want that. I want you to just write 75. And I want you to divide it by x squared. Once you have that written, so once this is typed into the calculator, y1 equals 75 divided by x squared, I want you to hit the second button. So hit the second button, and then the graph button. And I want you to be all the way where the x and y values are. I want you to be starting at 1. So I want you to write down, you have 1, 75. We're only going to write down the whole numbers. So I have 175, I have 5, 3, and that's actually everything that I see on my chart here by following these steps. Now this is actually a really quick way, guys, for you to get your answer. Everything we just did before was by hand, so that was your x and that was your y axis. Remember what we said before? That 1 in 75, that doesn't make sense. We're trying to break down this square root of 75. So square root of 75, well, by taking this calculator approach here, okay, this is actually already setting me up of what my final reduced answer is in simplest radical form. My final answer here is just going to be 5 radical 3. The value on the right gets the radical. So here we would just have 5 radical 3. The number on the left stays as a whole number, no radical. The number on the right gets the rad 3. So my final answer here is just 5 rad 3. Now, for those of you that like to do this by hand, well, the number that square root of 75 breaks down into is the square root of 25, the square root of 3. The square root of 25 is just 5, and the radical 3 comes along for the ride. This approach right here, guys, is skipping that mental math, those steps, okay? So let's continue. Let's try another one like that. Okay, so let's take a look at the square root of 300. So again, if I take that calculator approach, I'm going to click the y equals button. And in the y equals screen, you'll see y1 equals. We're going to take the number under the radical. So we have 300 divided by x squared. So typing in 300 divided by x squared. And we're going to go to second graph, second button, and then the graph button. And again, I'm going to start to make my list of all the whole numbers. So here we go. I have 1, 300. I have 5, 12. I have 10, 3. And that's everything I've got. Those are all the whole numbers that I see that I'm just scrolling through. Okay, now, when we decide, and remember everything on the right-hand side here is your square root, square root, square root, square root. We have to figure out which is the most simplified. Well, guys, the quickest way to do this is you take the set of numbers with the largest x value. The largest x value here is 10. That's the most simplified. Again, if you don't like this approach and you want to do this all by hand, feel free. But by creating this chart, these are all my options. 1 square root of 300. Well, that doesn't get us anywhere because that's what we're originally left with. 5 rad 12, that's simplified, but it's not simplified enough. 10 rad 3 is our answer. And again, if you want to do this by hand, so 10 rad 3 is our final answer. You could have broken this up into the square root of 100, square root of 3. Square root of 100 is 10, and you leave the radical 3. Okay? All right, guys, I'm just going to quickly go through 16 and 17, and you guys are going to do 11, 13, 14, and 15. All right, so I have 8 square root of 8, so I'm really just going to worry about this radical 8 here. So square root of 8, I know can be simplified down into the square root of 4 and the square root of 2. The square root of 4 is 2, and we leave the radical 2. Now, there's this 8 on the outside. Remember what I said before, that acts as multiplication to this, so they're getting multiplied. Don't forget to bring down the 8. And 8 times 2, you don't multiply it with the radical, you multiply it with the number on the outside. So 8 times 2 is 16, and I'm left with 16 radical 2. All right, and then lastly, question number 17. I have 4 times the square root of 36. The square root of 36, guys, that's a perfect square. The square root of 36 is 6, so I have 4 times 6. Remember, there's parentheses here. And this is just 24. And the solutions for 11 through 15, I'm going to write them right now, but you have to show the work on your own. These are the solutions. Okay, so there are solutions for 11 through 15. Again, if you guys need help, just let me know. Shoot me an email and we can discuss whatever you guys want to go over. Okay, so we're almost done. If we just go over to the last page here in our lesson, I'm just going to pick a few of these, and the rest of this really you guys can use as practice. Okay, now these are Regents questions, guys, so I want you to actually notice. See how this is multiple choice? You have one of the answers there. 4 of those choices are the options. One of them is the right answer. So say you're getting a little confused with breaking down the square root with the perfect square and the non-perfect square. Guess what? You can just type 3 radical 24 in your calculator. So I'm going to get the number for that. Okay, so I just typed in 3 times the square root of 24, and I have 14.69693846 ... I'm going to check what all the values are for each of these. I'm going to check what 12 rad 6 is, 6 rad 6, all of these options. All right, guys, so I just, again, put this all in my calculator, and it just wants to know which of these is equivalent. So if you're having trouble with being able to break it down, well, guess what? On this Regents question, you can get this right, because you can plug this in your calculator, and you can plug all of these answer choices in your calculator to see which number matches. And it turns out answer choice 2 is the only one that matches with the square root, 3 times the square root of 24. Now for question 23, I want you to notice the difference in the wording here. For question 21, it just said which is the equivalent. 23 says which of these is in simplest radical form. There's a difference. Equivalent just means I want them to have the same value. Simplest radical form is I want it simplified the most. So in my calculator, if I type in that y equals 32 divided by x squared, I'm going to check by doing second graph, and I'm going to look at what the table lists. All right, so again, whenever we're writing this out, we are writing the whole numbers. So now remember, this makes no sense. 1 and radical 32, that's what we're trying to break down. All of these get the square root, don't forget. Now, we want which is the most simplified. Well, which is the larger x value? Is it 2 or 4? Which is the most simplified? You can't break down that radical any further. It's going to be 4 rad 2, but be careful. Look at how 2 rad 8 is an answer choice. Regents likes to do that. The most simplified, though, is 4 radical 2. Hopefully you would have seen by process of elimination that this and this are out, and you would have had a 50-50 chance of picking between 1 and 3. All right, guys, I hope you found this video helpful. Again, I'm going to post the answer here for 22 and 24. So 22, you should have gotten 4, and for 24, you should have gotten also 4. All right, until next time, we'll talk soon.